Good evening, everyone. Today we're not going to discuss the nature of space and time, or what I believe to be the nature of space and time. Space and time are often misunderstood concepts. People don't really know what they mean by them. They mistake space and time to be a thing. Ever since Newton, space and time are assumed to be somehow existent as if they are things that we are meant to understand in the sense of physical objects. And so Einstein says they can be curved and so on and so forth. All of this must be interpreted. It's missing so much explanation what the heck that means, that space and time are supposed to be understood as things. And I think the fundamental understanding of space should be this. In order to have a difference, every difference in the world, it requires first that there be a similarity between the two things. There cannot be a difference unless there's first a similarity. Why? Well, there's nothing to say that the two are different unless there's something common, a judgment, which is a frame of reference, which is possible to discuss the two and to compare them. Otherwise, there's no meaningful difference. If you have something that's just so different, then another thing, that there's absolutely no similarities there, that would not be possible. Because then they wouldn't be different. They wouldn't be called different. They would just be two things. But every difference implies a similarity. And that's what Christopher Langan says. He calls it symbiosis. And it's a principle which says that every difference requires a syntax which makes it possible for both of them, a common syntax which both things are subject to, which makes it possible to compare them and distinguish them. The very act of distinguishing is also an act of comparing, and so it's a similarity there. There has to be a similarity there, or else the distinction of the two would not be possible. Now, in reality, there are distinctions. But yet we have to assume then that all of reality, even though all of reality is composed of distinct things, they all conform to this one syntax. There has to be this syntax. It has to be really out there, not just that we're describing it now, but that the syntax is meaningful, that there's something like what we're describing in the outside world for real, a syntax behind every part of reality. It is almost like a God of reality, which is in fact what Langan believes. But now, we have this syntax, and we want to understand a little bit about this syntax. And this syntax also corresponds to what we were saying before, about how space is fundamentally composed of a concept, of extension, of a syntax, of rules. Space is that syntax that Langan is referring to. Okay, because we see all objects, all things exist within something common. That's what Langan's pointing out. There has to be something common. What is that thing common? That is space. That's the missing part of Langan's thesis. He calls it God. Okay. But the explanation here is that is, I believe, space. Space is that syntax. And so space teaches us mathematics. Because that's essentially what it is. It is those mathematical rules. It's the syntax which is the code of those mathematical rules, which all objects conform to and depend on. And it's apparent within all reality. So that's space. Okay? What about time? Is time also to be understood this way? Or is time somehow different than space? Now there's one aspect of time which fundamentally shows that it's different, and that is the aspect of its presentness. There's something about a now that doesn't exist in space. In space, ultimately, we don't know where the now is. There is no now in space. The now only is born from time. Space cannot be looked at as any part of it is discrete. It isn't a thing like that. Like we were saying before, it is just the idea of extension. The mathematical rules of extension. That is the essence of space. Okay, but that doesn't give us a now. None of that is a now. Time, on the other hand, is not just a flow, a direction, as space is, which is the concept of extension. Time refers to something of a now, and that makes time fundamentally different. And to explain this, perhaps we can explain it like this. Time, the idea of time, should be understood like this. You see, there's something different about this now. This now that we were discussing, what makes this now unique is the fact that it's an experience. We don't just know of time, but we go through time. We experience time. We're a part of time. Space isn't like that. As a matter of fact, we don't really know exactly where we are. We're not really so much a part of space. We have this awareness of space. That we definitely do. We have a recognition of space. But we do not have an experience of space like we do with time. And I think what this indicates is that space is this objective thing, which is the syntax of reality. But time is fundamentally different. Time doesn't exist in the universe. Time, I think, should be understood as synonymous and identical with consciousness. The essence of being alive is to experience is to have a now, have a presence. That's where time is born from. The essence of aliveness is a presence, a continuous presence. It says we aren't talking about some kind, don't think of a line. Because a line has an infinite possibilities of points. This is a continuous now, which is our consciousness. That's why we experience it, because to be alive is to experience time. To experience a presence, which is the essence of time. Now, this isn't the only essence of time, because clearly time is something more. There's a past, there's a future, and that has to be explained. And I think that can be very easily explained when we consider the fact that it may just be a perspective given to us by our memories and beliefs and the like. In other words, we have memories of the past, and we have beliefs of things, of what we think it's going to be like in the future. So we have this perspective of past and future, and that's how we live. We live based on this. That's how we act in the environment. We process the past, we put it in the memory, and we say, okay, this is past. And then we have these beliefs about the future, and we say, okay, so what you're going to do now? Now, the essence of life is to say what you're going to do now, but we always have these memories and beliefs which create the the perspective and the notion of a past and a future. That's all it is. That's where it comes from. This idea of the past and future. It is memories and beliefs and the perspective given to us by it. It doesn't have to be a metaphysical reality, and it would be ridiculous to say it is on the basis of your own feeling of your own perspective of it, when it can so easily be explained as just your perspective. So, the only metaphysical time, the only real existential time is the time of the now. And the reason why that's existential is not because it exists in the world, necessarily, but because it exists to us, and it exists in our consciousness. And insofar as we are alive, we experience this time. Now, it's important to note that we experience that this time is given about objects that are in the world itself. They're not just about our own experiences. It's also about the world. The world, we think, goes through time. But that notion of the world is the phenomenal world. It is the world that we see, not the real world, but the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world goes through time. Indeed, that's true. And the reason why it goes through time is because time is the source of the phenomenal world. Time creates the phenomenal world. Because time is consciousness, and consciousness creates the phenomenal world, ultimately. So time is the background of the phenomenal world. It's the only way it's possible. In the same way, to experience is only possible because we need a self to experience. So in the same exact way, the only way you can experience time is the only way you can experience phenomena. The only way you can experience phenomena is if there's a self and if there's time there. Because self is identical with time, as you were saying before. So the time is necessary for phenomena. And so always given in phenomena. That there is a time there. But that doesn't mean it should be understood as something outside us. Actually, it is the assumption of the event, but it's not the event itself. Now, people say, okay, but clearly time is necessary for the world to make sense, not just because we experience it in the world, because that's not a question. As we were saying before, that's given there because that is the way we perceive anything, because we are perceiving it in terms of ourselves perceiving it, because that's what perception is. And so it's given in time, as consciousness is time, is the notion of time. It's applying time to the world. Of course, there's going to be the world in it, because that's what the essence of time. It applies time to the world in the same way the essence of consciousness is to apply consciousness to... Consciousness has to get content, it has to have something, what it's conscious about, and whatever it's conscious about... So the consciousness, which is time, it puts a presence to content. That's what it does. And when it does that, it creates time. So certainly when you see the event, you say, okay, that event happened in time. The reason you're saying that is because you create, that event is content in your consciousness. And your consciousness is about putting a presence to content. So it puts a presence to that content and it says, okay, this happened. And then you say, and it happened based on the past and the future because you have your memories and beliefs. And then you have your whole idea of time. It happened, and it happened at 2:30, before that, and after this. You have it all worked out. That's all possible based on what we're saying. And it's all very reasonably explained. So that's my idea of space and time. Space is external. It is an objective reality. But it isn't a thing in just the naive sense of just saying it's a thing. You'll compare it to a thing like a table or a chair. That's just ridiculous and absurd. That's not what's intended at all. If anything, it's an idealist sense of existence. It's an idealist existence. It is an idea. It includes the ideas of the mathematical laws and so on and so forth. It includes the syntax of reality. That's essentially what space is. It is the syntax of reality that Lingen refers to. The common thing that reality exists through and within. It exists in there somehow, and it exists through it, and it makes it possible for it to exist. It is this syntax. This fundamental code of reality, that is space. Time, on the other hand, is something about us. It's totally different. There is no relation of time to the outside world. It is totally something about us. It is about our consciousness. To be conscious is to create a presence. It's to create a moment, that there is a time, that there is something there, there's a moment. That's essentially what consciousness is. And so time is to be conscious, and what you do is, like, what do you do when you're conscious? You are conscious about something. You always have a content to the consciousness. And so what time does is the same way consciousness, the self, applies itself to the content. So time, we are saying, is consciousness. It is this creation of the notion of a presence, and it applies it to certain content, and it creates those phenomena, and so on and so forth. So you're applying time to things, to content, and you give them a sense of time. But metaphysically, they don't actually have time. There isn't time outside yourself. It is yourself. That's fundamentally what you are. You are this presence, and you apply things around you and so on. But it's not necessary for the description of reality itself. Now, when you consider reality in itself without you, after you, if you accept this, then it comes out to be quite bizarre, because reality in itself really doesn't exist in the way that you imagine it to at all. Because it doesn't exist in the sense of time. It only exists in the sense of space, in the sense of the syntax, and it's there as states of the world. Events lose all their meaning. Events aren't processes in time. That's not at all the definition. Events are just changes. I'm sorry. Events is just another fact about the state. That the state reforms itself to a different state at that, and so on and so forth. And this happens, and all changes. So all changes don't need time to explain them, because changes don't actually happen. Changes don't happen in the sense, you know what it's like? It's like this. Let me give you a good example. There's two kinds of ways that you can have a video playing on a video camera. Either you can have that it gives you a bunch of pictures, but it gives you them really fast, so you kind of think it's a video. Or you actually make video. Now, video is the notion, I'm saying it doesn't exist. There is no such thing. And in fact, it doesn't exist in this example that you might have realized. It was quite a bad example because there's no such thing. Ultimately, it's always going to come down to a picture-like method. But for this very reason, that's just the way that you should see the conclusion even more, that processes do not actually exist. Change doesn't actually exist in that sense. It exists to us in our phenomenal world in that sense, because we have time and so on, so that's how it's interpreted, and that's how it is to us in our phenomenal world. And no one's saying different, but in the actual world, time doesn't exist. And so change doesn't mean what it means to us at all. It is just facts. It is ultimately limited to just the syntactic code and the objective existence which follow their code. These are facts, and yes, they go from state A to state B, but that isn't actually a change. It's just a fact about the system that it goes from A to B. Ultimately, that could be, if it turns out all to be circular, perhaps that helps in some sense or not. But either way, the point is, it's ultimately reduced to facts. There is no time externally. There's no reason to say there is a time externally. And it is inconceivable to say there's a time externally, because it is absurd and undefendable, and has never been properly defended or satisfyingly defended. Or so I believe, and I believe this understanding of time is in fact the best interpretation of time, because available right now, because we can answer that, the fundamental question of what time is. And that answer is, it is life. It is consciousness. And it kind of shows where time comes from, because time is just, we have these five senses and everything. Where's the sense for time? Where do we get into that notion at all from? This it gives us a place for it, a recognizable place for it. And in the same way we have done for space. And by these virtues itself, I think this theory should go a long way. Thank you very much.